There is no strict formula as to what makes a great short story. Greatness, like beauty, exists very much in the eye of the beholder and is probably impossible to quantify in any sort of definitive way. As everyone has their own particular tastes, even prize judges, it should be clear that what might scratch the itch for one reader won't necessarily hit the spot for everybody. I measure a story by how it impacts on me, the way it lingers in my consciousness after I've finished reading, the way it raises my level of awareness and engages me to open up my mind and heart to my surround. As a writer, reading a great short story also fills me with the best kind of envy and makes me determined to work harder and give more of myself to my own work. Writers don't necessarily sit down with the intention of writing a great story, just as they never set out to write a bad one. Usually they are simply responding to some irresistible compulsion, trying in the only way they know how to make sense of the thoughts and concerns that have flooded their minds. But a great short story is a thing unique unto itself. When the story is right and presented in a truthful way, when it succeeds in reflecting real universal circumstances, when the characters breathe for themselves and we can see the lives they lead and the difficulties they struggle to overcome, when we can believe utterly in what we read, then the benchmark of greatness starts to loom within reach. The whole experience of working with the From the Well stories has made me realise, if I hadn't already known, just how many people are at home, head down, scribbling away, building stories and putting their thoughts, ideas and dreams down on the page. That's the first step, refusing to settle for merely wanting to be a writer and actually doing something about it. Understanding that all you really need to write is a pen and a piece of paper, and all you need to be able to write well is to read and write a lot every day, to put in the hours and to have a story worth telling. That most of all, to have a story worth telling. But squeezing heart and soul into a story is only part of the overall process. And if the work is to enjoy any kind of a life worth living, then it must find readers. It must be sent out into the world. That step takes courage, but it's also the only way forward. From the Well is a special contest because it draws its entrance through the library system. The world is changing fast, and computers and e-books are gaining greater traction with every passing day. But we must continue to value libraries as precious commodities, because even more so than universities, these are the cathedrals of learning that have historically helped produce writers. I remember as a 7 or 8-year-old coming across a collection of short stories in the Douglas Library called The October Country by Ray Bradbury, and it left me mesmerised. Those moments, the light coming dusty and yellow through the windows, the smell of the book's old paper, the feeling that I'd fallen into something magical, are still frozen within me. I only have to think of that evocative title and I'm back there. That's the sort of power books hold and libraries wield. Some years on from that early encounter, I came across an interview with Ray Bradbury in which he spoke of his own passion for these places. I believe in libraries, he said. When I graduated from high school, it was during the Depression and we had no money. I couldn't go to college, so I went to the library 3 days a week for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, I had read every book in the library and I'd written 1,000 stories. You must live feverishly inside a library. Colleges are not going to do you any good unless you are born, raised and live in a library every day of your life. Libraries are where most people first fall in love with books. They're where the flame gets lit. And for me, From the Well reflects something of that. While other avenues of the literary world can feel closed off or at least daunting to most people, a contest like this encourages and motivates and gets people dreaming. It is a launch pad of sorts. And several writers who have published over the years within the anthology's pages have used it as a stepping stone to even greater success. All of which brings me neatly enough to this afternoon's readers. 3 very fine writers who have already started to gain recognition for their work and who are clearly moving towards bigger things and brighter days. It was a pleasure to read their stories for this contest, along with my fellow judges Claire Kilroy and Emer Ryan, and to be able to introduce them to you here today in this library. So I'll just introduce the 3 readers. The first to read will be Anne O'Leary. Anne, who lives in Glanmire, County Cork, was shortlisted twice in 2016 and 2017 for the Colm Tóibín International Short Story Award. Placed second in the UCC Carried in Waves Short Story Competition 2015 and was longlisted for both the Greenbean Novel Fair 2016 at the Irish Writers' Centre and the RTE Guide Penguin Ireland Short Story Competition 2015. Her work has been published in Halo, Spontaneity, the Incubator and the Sunday People newspaper. She is also the winner of this year's From the Well prize for her story Smoke in the Rain, which gives this year's anthology its title. Our next reader will be Mary Rose McCarthy. Having gone around in circles, living in London, Sierra Leone and Dublin, Mary Rose is now back where she started in West Cork. Worst places to be, I suppose. She has written 2 as yet unpublished novels and has started a 3rd. She has been the recipient of both the Kenny Naughton Short Story Award and the Golden Pen Short Story Award, and has been shortlisted 6 times for the From the Well prize. And her work has appeared widely in such places as Cranogue, Boyne Berry's Woman's Way, Ireland's Own, the Evening Echo and the Hollybow. She also won the John Hewitt Bursary in July. So our 3rd reader of the day then will be Tadhg Coakley. Tadhg lives in Cork. In 2017, he graduated with an MA in creative writing in UCC, focusing on short form fiction. His stories have been published in Quarryman and Silver Apples. His short film, Memorial, how do I say it? Memorial, okay. There's a capital E in the middle of it. All right, okay. Memorial to the Moment was published in the Cinephiles. His first short story collection, The All Ireland, which might be called a novel when it comes out, was shortlisted for the Mercier Press Fiction Prize 2017 and will be published by them next year. So I'll just hand you over now to Anne O'Leary, who's going to read her story. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? My voice doesn't carry very well. Thanks very much for the introduction, Billy, and thanks very much to Munster Literature Centre for inviting me to read at this event and representing this great competition. So as Billy said, the story is called Smoke in the Rain. Heaving his guts out over the starboard side of the Hannah Rose, Danny Barrett realises he's made a mistake. He can't take another minute. The roller coaster motion of the waves, the stench of fish and diesel, the bone-rattling thrum of the ancient engine. Unfortunate, then, that they are only half an hour into the 12-hour fishing trip. He was warned to wear old stuff because it's dirty work, but he only thought to put on his worst tracksuit bottoms and the bomber jacket with the cigarette burn he's been hiding from his mother. Noel, the skipper, sized him up when he arrived on the dockside, then threw him some heavy-duty waterproofs and a pair of gloves with a price tag attached. They looked like clown gloves on Danny's 15-year-old hands. His mum insisted on waiting at the end of the pier as the trawler sailed out of harbour, even though he'd instructed her not to stay and watch. But the crew didn't tease him about it on account of his dad. It isn't his first time setting foot on a boat. His dad often used to let him explore the wild one when she was moored. Even on tranquil days, she was never still, always ducking and weaving like a scrappy boxer. She's mad for road, Da used to say. And young Danny would imagine a cartoon boat heading down the highway, belting out Born to be Wild. He was such a kid then. When he got bigger, he had to help Da clean her out at the weekends, though he couldn't stand the smell and feel of the fish, putrid in the heat of summer, slimy and cold as death the rest of the year. He also got sick as a dog on the shore tops they made, and would beg to be set back down on land as his stomach tried to escape through his throat. He used every excuse in the book to dodge going out on the water, and to his credit, Da never pushed him. You'll get a feel for it in time, Da said. No denying what's in the blood. He said he'd take him out properly when Danny was ready. The Hannah Rose is headed southwest. Noel has word that there's good fishing about 2 hours out, and he's in bad need of a decent haul. After one look at Danny's face, Noel shoves him into the wheelhouse and finds an unopened packet of seasickness tablets in a cabinet. Knew I'd need these some day for a landlubber, he says in a lame pirate voice, giving Danny tea from a flask that is semi-solid with sugar. Eventually the crazy heaving eases, though Danny is still left with a dull nausea. But at least he's no longer praying to God or anyone who'll listen to make this stop. He even feels brave enough to venture out on deck again, gripping the rail for all he's worth. The swells become choppier the further they go, the wind stealing his breath when he turns into it, and the waves spraying him so completely that the cold permeates through the waterproofs. He has put on his dad's old wellies, which Mum carried down to the pier in a plastic bag, and then presented to Danny as if they were war medals. They're not the ones Dad drowned in, obviously. Those, like him, are still somewhere out in the blue beyond. These are the backup ones that have been gathering dust in the garage. They curve in a memory of his dad's feet. Danny feels like someone waking up from a nightmare, only to find themselves in an even worse reality. For one crazy moment, he considers ringing Mum. He even takes out his mobile phone and wipes foam off the screen with a clown glove, hoping for a signal. But what could she do for him? He is beyond reach, even if she were inclined to help. He tries to keep his sights within the perimeter of the boat, the solid metal bits of safety, to avoid looking at what's beyond. Treacherous sea in every direction, grey waves merging into grey sky. The weather has turned unexpectedly rough, and angry swells lash around them, gulls screaming and swooping low overhead. Underpinning it all, the vibration of the engine pulses through his body like it will never again leave him. If he was at home today, instead of clinging to a rust bucket in the arse end of the ocean, he'd be hanging around with the lads in the amusement arcade. It's been a changeable summer, with another month of school holidays stretching ahead. On fine days, they go to a rocky cove that only they know how to reach. They head down to the beach in the early evening as the holidaymakers are packing away their pop-up tents and fancy picnics. No one pays any attention to them, picking their way over the jagged rocks that mark the end of the beach, on the far side of which the cove lies hidden from view. He and Brian usually carry fishing rods on their shoulders, 6 packs of lager in their backpacks that Brian's older sister buys for them. Neither of them does much fishing. Gavin and Cian don't own fishing rods, so they bring a golf club each. They don't do much golfing either. Instead, they use the clubs for battles in the cove, taking swipes at each other's ankles in tests of bravery and bone. It isn't so hard to feel happy then, perched on rocks and yelling insults as he watches the others lunging and dodging. When it's his go, he has to restrain himself from swinging too hard and destroying some unprepared part of his opponent. He can feel the urge coursing down through the hand that holds the club, and it's no mighty challenge to control himself, to keep it clean. One evening last week, when the sun set below the cliff face and threw their cove into cold shade, they went up around the holiday houses, the new ones on the hill with open views of the bay. The ones the posh city types come down to at the weekend and forget about once the evenings turn cold. They only went for a look, peeping in windows to see the flat-screen TVs and coffee makers like time machines in the open kitchens. But then Cian found a way into the back garden of number 6, and they could see its potential as a base, somewhere to drink unobserved. When the owners came down at the weekend, they did their nut about the mess. The cans and cigarette butts on the patio, chip wrappers in the rose bushes, graffiti on the gazebo. The guards were waiting for the lads the next evening, intercepting them as they made their way back up from the beach. They said they had a good idea of who had done the trespassing, and if it happened again, action would be taken. "We do not know what yous are talking about, officer," Danny said in a good fellow's voice, and the lads sniggered. If Danny had one skill, it was that he was brilliant at accents. Garda Bahan, who knew him because everyone knows everyone around here, looked him in the eye. "Go home, Danny," he said. "Don't make me have to talk to your mother about you." In a way, Danny wished Garda Bahan would talk to his mother. Somebody should. Not much seems to get through to her these days. When he arrives home, sunburned to a blister in the evenings, she'll be slumped in front of the TV, staring at whatever's on. The first few times, he ate half a packet of mints to cover the smell of beer and fags, but she didn't notice a thing. These days she'll go to the shop in her pyjama bottoms, her hair pulled back in a sloppy ponytail, not even washed, not even brushed. She would never have allowed herself to be seen like that before. Noel came to the house a couple of days after the incident with the guards and asked if Danny would be sound and give him a hand on the boat. Mam was delighted. "Your dad'd be so proud," she whispered. Danny said okay, he'd do it. She smiled for the first time and he didn't know how long. Actually, he did know how long. It would be a year in September. Noel looked pleased too. He was Da's cousin and was meant to have gone out that morning the Wild One sank. All 4 lives grabbed by a pouncing squall. He had a hangover to thank for his salvation. After a 3-day bender confined him to bed and made him think he was dying when really he was living. He'd been very good to Danny and his mum ever since. He said Danny would love it once he got his sea legs under him. He was wrong. 5 hours in, and the sea fills Danny's line of vision when they plunge forward, disappearing from view when they tip back up. It has started to rain too, though it's hard to tell what's rain and what is spray spat right in his eyes. The crew seem impervious to their surroundings as they start hauling in the net that they've been dragging. It needs to be brought in before the weather gets any worse, Noel says. It's winched in slowly by whining, oily cables and a motor that sounds like it's in its final throes. As soon as it drops on deck, the net goes limp and hordes of fish start leaping in every direction, desperately fighting their way back home. Noel and the 2 crew work fast but calmly, sorting and discarding with sure hands, looking like grim reapers in their hooded raincoats as they huddle over the gasping catch. They all have fags clamped between tight lips, flinging half-smoked butts overboard as the rain extinguishes them. No one seems bothered by that, they just accept the way of it. They barely pause to light the next cigarette with a current one, manic puffs of smoke dispersing in the rain like they never existed in the first place. Danny has no idea what's expected of him. Before they departed, while his mum, properly dressed for the first time in months, waited with the old patients, Noel showed him the ropes. This consisted of a long list of what not to do and what not to touch in descending order of lethalness, but otherwise he was just to follow everyone's instructions. Hold this, pull that, get out of the way fast, always fast. In the speed of the haul and the turn in the weather, no one has time to give him orders, so the most useful thing he can do is stay out of harm's way. This must be what hell is like, he thinks, taking in the screeching, clanging, relentless rage. He looks at the gasping fish out of water and the silent men off land, and he thinks, none of us should be here. It makes no sense to be so far from certainty, none at all. And yet, there's something here, some old familiarity in the heave and lunge, the give and take, the battle of fear against a growing thrill as the waves surge and the trawler resists. It's like a memory is working its way out of the water itself, up through the deck, through his feet, through his hands as they cling tightly to the rail. He finds himself instinctively balancing and counterbalancing like a skateboarder. It's almost fun. Though he can't hear him, he sees Noel turn and gesture for him to grab a bucket of rejects and empty it over the port side. This he can do. Steadying himself in Da's wellies, he lets go of the rail. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Billy. for the kind introduction. Thank you to the Munster Literature for having us. It's kind of surreal to be standing up here rather than to be sitting down there, so thank you very much. This is called The Good Farmers, and of course there's nothing at all good about it. Right then, Father announced at breakfast, about a week after Mother and I returned with the new baby. The hay's ready to bring in and the forecast is good, so no shilly-shallying and dawdling about the jobs this morning. The men will be here soon to bale, and we'll borrow Harrington's trailer. And you, he said, gesturing towards me, will drive it. He pulled on his Wellington boots in the back kitchen, downed the usual half-glass of whiskey my mother left on the sink for him, and strode out to the yard. My father was a tall, heavy-set man with bushy black eyebrows that practically met in the middle. His favourite saying was that he only expected to say a thing once. The grass in the top field and the lower meadow had been cut the previous Saturday, and watched and turned and turned and watched until it was as dry as autumn leaves, ready to bale and bring in. Hay smells of summer blue skies, white scudding clouds, bottles of milky tea in the middle of the field, and the sadness of time passing. On a small holding like ours, with too little land and too many mouths, we all mucked in, no matter how big or small the task. Each of us had been designated work, even Maria, who was just 7. Driving the trailer was the worst job, as my progress along the rows of bales was always either too fast or too slow to satisfy Father. My father had not spoken to me directly since I'd come back. Peter, my infant son, was to be raised as part of the family, but I could never lay claim to him, with either my siblings or any friends or neighbours. Take it or leave it, Father had said. That's all there's to say. Instinctively, I kept an eye out for the baby, irrespective of what work was on hand. Maria liked to wheel Peter and a selection of her dolls round the yard in the pram. She enjoyed making him laugh and coo. She read to him from her Ladybird books. At times, he interrupted her with oohs and ahs and grunts. When she got fed up playing with her dolls, she put them to bed. "Go asleep and don't be bothering me," she'd sing out in her queer, high-pitched voice. "I'll only say it the once." Maria was a short, chubby child with foxy red hair and piercing blue eyes. There was an ethereal sort of strangeness, a streak of weirdness in her. She was not likeable. Those eyes always bored right through me, seeming to know more than she should. Her skin was pearlescent, as if she'd never been in the sun. Probably too busy eavesdropping in shadows, ferreting out bits and pieces of information. That hazy blue morning, Mother stayed in the kitchen to bake the brown soda bread and make the dinner for the agricultural contractors. She was a slight, grey-haired woman with a permanent crease between her eyes and the puckered lips of someone who'd swallowed something bitter. Sometimes she spoke in eloquent shrugs and sighs. She left most of the talking and orders to my father. "Your job is to keep the baby quiet," she told Maria. "I want him out from under my feet. I've only got the one pair of hands, and there's enough to do on a day like today. Don't be calling on me for every whinge and whine." The blue haze dissipated quickly. The sun was hot and the swallows circled high. Beyond the gate were heat-warped fields where cattle cooled underneath gnarled skyocks. I heard Peter whimper, but I continued mixing the mash for the pigs. Maria knew how to soothe him. She made funny faces or gave him the dummy or shook the pram from side to side. I watched Maria from the piggery door, distracted by the baby's cry. Once or twice I'd seen her pinch the baby, though she'd always denied doing it. I wasn't altogether convinced that she'd taken to him as well as everyone claimed. It was a respite to stop for a few minutes. My arm ached from hauling and dragging buckets back and forth across the yard. Deep in that inner place, I had a different, more primordial ache from which there was no respite. One minute, Maria cajoled Peter and scolded him the next, but he refused to be placated by her antics. She rocked the pram from side to side and wagged her finger in Peter's face. She glanced in my direction. A tentative smile sneered her upper lip. This time you're going too far. I've only got the 2 hands. For crying out loud. Stop it this minute. I'm warning you, or I'll give you good reason to bawl. Maria looked at me again, noted me watching. Purple-faced, she stamped her foot in time with each threat. It seemed I watched through distorted window pane, yet registered the needle pricks of sunburn on my nose and the sharpish stone of the piggery wall against my right shoulder. A corner of my mind niggled with thoughts I couldn't quite grasp, as if clouds parted only to fill in again before the mountains could be glimpsed. I felt there was something I should be doing, but I remained paralysed, propped against the rough wall. Maria flung the pram to the ground, consumed with rage. Dolls sprawled everywhere in the dirt and muck of the yard. Sun glinted on the chrome handle, one wheel spun round and round. Stunned by her own tantrum, Maria plumped down beside the dolls. The navy pram hood obscured my view. It was eerily still. No sound came from either the baby or Maria. My scalp tightened, my skin crawled, and my stomach lurched. Bile and tears choked my throat. I remained where I was, and enthralled, watched events unfold. My mother ran from the house, alerted by the sudden quiet of baby and Maria. Her apron flew shield-like before her in the breeze. Seconds later, my father appeared from the milking parlour, a heavier protective apron tied at his waist. At the same time, the large green tractor towing the canary yellow baler hovered into sight. Chugs of dirty smoke from the exhaust pipe scribed black exclamation marks on sky the colour of a robin's egg. I watched the tractor's slow progress as it backfired its way to the top field. My father scooped up Peter, a tiny, still, white-faced thing in his thick, hairy arms. My brother grabbed the dog by the collar and locked him in the shed. Mother yanked Maria up from the ground. Father carried the baby into the house. Within minutes, he re-emerged. Take that, fill it with water and scrub the yard there, and don't come back inside till you're told, he said, handing Maria a bucket. He turned to me. Get inside, now. I followed him into the house. There's a number beside the phone for the priest, he said without looking at me. Ring and ask him to come with Connolly as soon as they can. Then get out to the top field and tell Murray to leave the hay for a couple of more days. Connolly had the funeral home in the town. The haymen looked at me in open-mouthed disbelief, silver snail tracks of sweat on their dusty faces. Something's happened, something's bad, he's dead, the baby's dead. I blurted out the words and ran back towards the house. On the way, I passed Maria in the yard as she scrubbed at a rusty brown stain, and the soapy water caught rainbows as it trickled down the yard to the shuck. The sun drilled down on the back of her neck, but she ignored me as she hummed in rhythm with each brush stroke, her upper lip curled in derision. The cold hit me when I went back inside, and my eyes took some minutes to adjust to the indoor gloom. A goat cloth, only used for the station mass on Christmas, draped the table in the parlour. Peter lay on his back, minuscule against the starched white, his few strands of foxy hair the only colour in the Arctic tableau. A dark brown stain flowered near his right ear. In the distance, there was the sound of tractors as they made their way back down the boreen. No one spoke. A sleek black funeral car, purred into the yard. The priest and doctor arrived soon afterwards. In the parlour, the three men blenched and were strangely quiet. They shook hands with my father and ignored Mother and I. Connolly swaddled Peter in the station-best white cloth and cradled him against his chest to the car. He placed the bundle on the passenger seat and drove off. A smell of bacon and cabbage bubbled through the house. Over the next few days, neighbours swarmed in from the surrounding farms and further away villages. My parents were well liked, known for miles around as good farmers who always got the hay saved on time. People offered sympathy, muttering sorry for your troubles to my parents and patting them on the shoulders, but shuffled past the rest of us, unsure what to say to teenagers. They moved into the parlour where a different good cloth adorned the table and talked in muted voices, experts on other people's tragedy, secretly relieved it wasn't theirs. Phrases like, "they'll never get over it," or "what a terrible thing it is to lose a child," grazed my ears. As if Peter had been put down somewhere, and for now, no one could quite recollect where. As if the lost baby would turn up at any moment and life would carry on, feeding pigs and saving hay. As if his life or death had nothing to do with Maria or me. My parents received the hundreds of pressed handshakes and the condolences in stoic silence. Lilies and incense fragranced the church. Our family squeezed into the front pew. The priest looked towards us as he gave a short homily about how it is God who gives and only God can take away. It felt as if he were addressing me alone, and I wondered how much he knew, speculated what sorts of stories people shared in confession, and clasped my secret shame close. Mesmerised, I watched the small white coffin borne along the grey gravel path that led from the church to the cemetery. The maw of the grave loomed large in proportion to the tiny casket it yawned to receive. Sounds were limited to blackbird song and shuffled feet, followed by a lilted susurrus murmuring 5 sorrowful mysteries of the rosary. And then more handshakes followed, and more moist-eyed mourners mumbling in low voices about an accident and the mysterious ways of God. After the burial, everyone returned in silence to the still, hushed house. The kitchen table was weighed down with sandwiches, casseroles, cakes, bottles of Powers and black porter. Hospitality proffered as consolation. No one ate much. Everything felt like sawdust in throats ached raw with unshed tears. The visiting women sorted and cleared away the food. The men stayed in the parlour, gulping stout from bottles dwarfed in large, far-mown hands. At breakfast the next morning, no one spoke. My mother looked as if a drawstring had tugged her puckered lips tighter than ever. She sat and stared out the window. My father tucked into porridge and butter-slathered soda bread as usual. Maria hummed in between mouthfuls and swung her legs in time to a tune she alone knew. The Murray men arrived to bale the hay which still lay in the top field and meadow. It had the musty smell of grass about to rot, but would make good enough fodder for the cattle during the long winter ahead. Both fields were baled and brought in on the one day. A few neighbours lent a hand. In silence, backs bent and hefted the dense loads onto the slow-moving trailer. That night, the clouds opened and poured rain. It proved Father correct again. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces down there, which is lovely. Little word of warning, this is another dark story, so brace yourselves. It's called Angels. Is this really happening? Are you here sitting in front of the TV right now, this minute, waiting for the match to start, drinking can after can of beer? Or is it somebody else, not you? Did you do that? You couldn't have. Do what? Did you take a pillow to Jenny and Cass upstairs after drugging them like you'd planned for weeks? Was that you? I bet it was. You did. Or did you? You're not sure. How can you not be sure of something like that? The girls are in their beds upstairs. You're almost certain of it. You look around the room, well, they're not here. Where else could they be? You crushed up the halcyon tablets first thing this morning with the mortar and pestle when she left to go to the match. You cried as you did it, the sound of the tablets cracking like dried bones. Then you sprinkled the powder into their hot chocolate to sedate them. You did. You did. You tried to remember if you put the pillow over their precious sleeping faces, or if you just stood there with it trembling in your hands, walking back and forth at the end of the beds, talking to yourself, with the soft morning sunlight flowing through the windows, reflecting off the creamy pillowcase. That powdery smell in the room. Their little chests rising and falling as they slept, rising and falling. Jenny's left leg bent funnily under her, Cass's Star Wars tattoo of that robot on her forearm, her strawberry blonde hair spilling down over her face. Those pink frozen pajamas that she insists upon wearing night after night, with the Disney-fied, doe-eyed, heart-shaped faces of those sisters, Anna and Emma. Or is it Elsa? Did you ride Cass's hair and straighten Jenny's leg before you took the pillow to them? You can't remember. You must have. You did. You didn't. You do know that Jenny walked groggily up the stairs, and you did carry Cass up to the bed after the hot chocolate. That is definite. They are in their beds, that's for sure. The pencil feels heavy in your fingers as you try to write some words in the notebook, but no words will come. What words are there anyway, and what good will they do her or anybody else? You open another can, looking blankly at the screen. The sound is turned down because of the headache. You couldn't be listening to those Muppets anyway. The minor match is nearly finished. Kilkenny again, the bastards. Your phone on airplane mode says 13:57, an hour and a half to go. She was full of it this morning, heading off to the match with Trish and that dopey husband of hers. And him too, probably. Bitch. Poured, as she'd say herself about some other woman, into those white skinny jeans she thinks she's only divine in. What was that expression she had the other day about something she didn't like? Oh yes, I wouldn't be wild about that. Yes, very good when you think of it, but the opposite doesn't work. I'm wild about that. No. You can say I'm crazy about that, all right. Can you say I'm not crazy about that? Speaking of crazy, take another Tofenil there, boy, while you think of it. You open another can. These slabs of beer are great value, only €20 for 24 cans. You hear a song from the radio in the kitchen, Breakfast in America, ELO, or is it Supertramp? You sing along. It would be nice to see the girls in California, but it's too late now. You na-na-na yourself off into reverie, and then you sleep. You dream about walking down a never-ending hospital corridor. It's in John of God's, of course, and yet it isn't. In the way that dreams have of bringing you somewhere that isn't really there. It is John of God's because you know it is. It isn't because there are no zombie patients shuffling around in tracksuit pants and stained t-shirts. No kind-faced nurses or competent-faced psychiatrists. No bloated-faced, doped-up, stubbled ex-architects looking out at you from mirrors. No smells or mumbling or shame or terror. You wake up. Can you even smell in dreams? It bothers you. You try to recall if you ever have. There are ads on the TV and you have a sudden horror that you slept out. 14:29. Phew. An hour to go. A bit of a lurch when you get up, but you right yourself. Have to tidy the place up. You pick up some empty cans and the hot chocolate cups, one Star Wars, one frozen. You smell the dregs in the cups. Nothing. No wonder they use it to drug girls and rape them. Another thing you're saving them from. Altruistic filicide. You count them, 7 syllables. Sounds almost innocuous. Stupid name halcyon too when you think of it. Should be called somnium or something like that. The sunlight in the kitchen assaults your eyes and takes you back to the incessant rows when you were redesigning the house, when you'd show herself the new drawings. I thought we were going to have the island here, she said, pointing to the center of the room on the plan. Yeah, it kind of blocks the flow there. If we have it here, we'll get the benefit of the French doors and the view outside. Fuck the fucking flow of the room. I wanted it there. It's the one thing I asked you, the one thing, to have my own kitchen, but no, the flow of the room. Jesus Christ, she said, before storming out and slamming the door behind her. She never got her island in the end. Events intervened, didn't they? Events, dear boy. But you were right too. It would have blocked the flow. Not that it matters much now. The bank will probably take the house anyway, along with everything else. Incessant, never ceasing. You put the cups in the dishwasher, must turn that on too. It all seems so unreal, or so real. Maybe you're dreaming the whole thing. Maybe you'll wake up in a minute and it'll be what? Be fine? Be over? She'll have him to console her, of course. Imagine denying it to your face when you eventually built up the courage to confront her. It was all in your head. She had no interest whatsoever in any other man. You invented the whole thing. She thinks you're some fool laughing at you behind your back, but we'll see who has the last laugh. She can go and fuck him all she wants now. See how she enjoys it now. She can make 2 more kids for herself with him, and see how that works out, but she's not getting yours. Oh no, they're yours. They stay with you. Anyway, the literature was quite clear. Resnick's study catalogued the motives for filicide as 1, altruistic, tick. 2, acutely psychotic, tick, probably. 3, accidental filicide, e.g. maltreatment, no tick. 4, unwanted child, no tick. And 5, spouse revenge, tick. 3 out of 5. And when you add in the history of depression, tick. Previous self-harm, tick. Mental illness, tick. Consumption of alcohol and medication, tick, tick. And fear of spousal estrangement, tick, tick, tick. That's a lot of ticking. Which reminds you, you look at the kitchen clock. 3:14, getting close now. They'll be on the pitch already. If they can only mark McMahon, they'll do it. Solly's scoring goals, he's scoring goals. If you're psychotic, can you be aware you're psychotic? Wouldn't that negate the psychosis if it's true? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. You check yourself. You wonder sometimes if you're saying out loud what you're thinking. No, it's quiet. Another thing. Isn't it fair to say that if life is hard, which it is, and full of pain and suffering, which it is, and then you fall in love and get dumped, which you do, and then you're alone and lonely, which you are, and then you get depressed, which you do, and then you can't work, which you can't, and then you are poor, which you will become, and then you're stressed to the gills, which you are, and then you get old, which you do, and then you get sick, which you will, and then you die in misery, inevitably, then isn't it better to prevent all that? Well, isn't it? To have never suffered pain or worry or despair, to fall asleep painlessly as a child and never to wake up as an innocent, pure and clean, to become angelic, to become, in fact, an angel. Angels, that's what they look like in their 2 beds, and that's what they will always be now. Perfect, washed pure in the sunlight, buried side by side in their little white coffins, in their good dresses, beautiful and pure, Daddy's little angels. And you there with them, beside them in the ground, looking after them forever. Will that really happen? Will it though? You bend over, you moan, you hold on to the sink for support. You wander back into the living room, more like stagger. You flop on the sofa, need to keep on top of things, but fuck it, you open another can from the slab. You think about turning up the sound, but no, this is better. Both teams are parading behind the band. Up the rebels. Looks like they put quality on McMahon at right half-back. Good move. The game begins. You sip your beer and settle down to fret. The game is shit. Cork are hanging on for dear life, lucky to be just a couple of points down at half-time. Sully hardly touches the ball all first half. You take a well-earned piss in the downstairs loo. No going back upstairs. Not now. Angels. Daddy's angels forever. No pain, no worry, no sorrow, only peace forever. You wake up on the sofa. Did you fall asleep again? Shit, you did. How could you have fallen asleep at a time like this? You look at the TV but can't focus. You're groggy. Must be all the beer. Somebody's being interviewed. You look for the packet with the 15 meters of rope on the coffee table. It isn't there. It was earlier, you're almost certain. You bought it 6 months ago. Did you bring it in from the shed before the game and put it on the table? Did you open the packet and make the noose like you learned on YouTube and wrap it around 2 of the banisters? You're convinced that you did. Or did you imagine it? The match is over. The Muppets are talking in silence. Then it switches to show Sean Cullity accept the cup and raise it above his head. You look to your left. 2 little pale waifs are standing by the door in their little bare feet. 2 angels. Cass in her frozen pyjamas, Eeyore hanging from her right hand. Jenny in her long night dress, the back of her index finger in her mouth, the way she does when she's anxious, her hair over her eye, the way it hangs there. Your angels. Jenny has grown so tall. She's the image of your sister Eva at that age, all gangly arms and legs. She's looking straight at you, her head swaying slightly. Cass is staring at the TV. Her eyes are wide, replete with wonder, and she gives a shiver of excitement. She says something that you almost don't hear. She says, "Oh." You feel your face fall in upon itself. It fissures and crumbles and caves in, and something escapes out of it, some untenable sound. Is this really happening? Thanks very much.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes, so if there's any questions for those very, very cheerful stories that we can all be glad we weren't in. Why are writers such happy people?
It's not so much that we're unhappy, but sometimes these stories come to you and you have to write them. My story actually came to me from William Wall's story that he wrote in his latest short story collection. It's a brilliant story called The Mountain Road, about a man who drives into the sea with his 2 daughters in the back of the car, and it was written from the point of view of an ex-girlfriend of his, a neighbour, and it's about her reaction to it really and the day after. And I thought it was a brilliant story, but I thought, what would it be like to write a story about that subject, but from the point of view of the man himself, and the day before it happens, where maybe he withdraws from the act at the last minute.
Sorry, did you, is it actually working? It is working. Did you ask why writers are happy people or unhappy? I think, I don't think writers are necessarily either happy or unhappy, but I don't think there's much drama in happy stories. The drama does seem to come from things going well, isn't it?
And I think I've said this before, my motto is like, why be happy when you can be sad? See, there you get everybody laughing straight away. So I think sometimes the darkness shows us the light as well. And I think for me it's always easier to write dark stuff than humorous stuff. Because I think humorous stuff sometimes ends up being satire or parody or just falls apart on me. So yeah, that's fine. But I'm a very cheerful person usually.